pass the call to Mr O'Brien, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Premier. Premier, who made the decision to use private security guards in the hotel quarantine program?
Well, the National Cabinet on the 27th of March approved the rollout of a hotel quarantine system for returned travellers. That was to be stood up by midnight. That was a Friday. Midnight the following night, being midnight the Saturday night. We had already begun a process of engaging with hotels using private security and others to support health workers who needed to isolate, to support vulnerable members of the Victorian community who needed to isolate. So in many respects, the hotel quarantine system simply became an extension of previously agreed and processes, so a service, if you like, that was already on the ground and running. The ultimate arrangements for hotel quarantine, so firstly, that it should happen, that's National Cabinet. Then the Victorian Cabinet approves a set of arrangements, and then they are implemented and delivered by officials and others at a very local level, because this is ultimately, it's about the care and support of people, individual by individual, family by family. So,
can I clarify, Premier, was it the Victorian Cabinet or the Crisis Cabinet?
Oh, sorry, Crisis Council.
Thank you. Can I then ask, why was the decision made to use private security guards as opposed to police or ADF oversight?
Well, in terms of the ultimate answer as to the desirability, effectiveness or otherwise of all these arrangements, there is another process to deal with that.
Premier, you've got the Parliament of Victoria doing an inquiry that you asked PAYAC to do.
Yes.
You asked us to do this inquiry. You're here now. We're asking you to answer the questions.
Well, and what I'm saying to you, Mr O'Brien, is that, back to the point I made earlier on, the process I'm referring to is not set up to avoid answering questions, it's to get us answers. And if clearly this system has not worked as it should have, it is unclear to me exactly where's the origin and what the nature of some of those deficiencies and failures are, and therefore we have sought a separate process so as not to mark our own paper, as it were. It's instead to have others look at that in detail. In terms of the arrangements, our Crisis Council of Cabinet funded and endorsed a program. The program is then delivered at a local level by a very big team, a team that was able to, I think, provide support and quarantine for in excess of 20,000 people. The exact nature of security arrangements, their adequacy or otherwise, that is appropriately a matter for Judge Coate to look at. And I'm confident...
You've just told us that it was a decision of the Victorian Crisis Cabinet to...
Well, it's funded, Mr O'Brien, it has to be. It's funded, so it has to be a decision of the Crisis Council.
So my question is, why did you choose to use private security guards rather than police or ADF?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the use of ADF. I don't believe ADF support was on offer. And ADF support has been provided in very limited circumstances in New South Wales, not to provide security as such, but to provide transportation from the airport to hotels. So again, I think it is fundamentally incorrect to assert that there was hundreds of ADF staff on offer and somehow someone said no. That's just not, in my judgment, accurate.
That actually wasn't the question, Premier.
Oh, yes, it absolutely was. Why did I do one thing and not do another?
The question was, why did you choose private security guards?
Well, there was a proposal drawn up. It was essentially already operating at some significant scale, but would need to go to another level. It was running quarantine and support services for a range of different people, whether it be health workers, vulnerable Victorians, women and children fleeing family violence. The best answer I can give you is that it was this hotel quarantine model was simply an extension of those arrangements that had until that point, and I have no evidence to the contrary, had worked well in those cohorts. It was simply expanded to include the return travellers, and it was stood up within the specified time frame. and they are the decisions that were made. It was essentially an extension of a program that we had already stood up, nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, Premier, on the 14th of July, The Age reported a leaked email from the Department of Jobs and Precincts and Regions urgently to DHHS and Emergency Management Victoria, requesting Victoria Police be present 24/7 at each hotel starting from this evening. It was within 24 hours. And it says, we ask that DHHS urgently make that request as the control agency. So if your government was warned within 24 hours of the program starting that there was a need for police oversight, why didn't the government respond to that?
Well, Mr O'Brien, I'm not going to respond to an email that purports to be from a person within government. I've not seen that email. I'm not aware of the efficacy of that email. Again, there's 106,000 pages of documents that have been provided to Judge Cope. She'll work through those, and that's appropriate. I'm happy to concede that I've not read those 106,000 pages of documents. I don't think you would expect me to have.
I'd just like you to answer the question, Premier. The government was warned. Why doesn't it take action?
Mr. O'Brien, can you let the Premier answer the question, please?
Mr. O'Brien, you're putting it to me that a document I've not seen from a person, I'm not even sure whether that document's attributed to anybody. You're asserting that was a warning. I suppose I'm not necessarily agreeing with you that you can make that claim.
Well, Premier, can I put it another way then? If the Age reported this on the front page on the 14th of July, surely you and your office have followed up this issue and have sought answers as to why the Department of Health and Human Services didn't respond to the request that we needed police oversighting the hotel quarantine program.
Well, if I can put it another way to you, I'm not going to set up a judicial inquiry, an inquiry chaired by a former judge, and then conduct the same inquiry myself.
Premier, you set up this inquiry, this PAYAC inquiry. You personally asked PAYAC to do this, and now you're not answering our questions on this important issue.
No. Mr. O'Brien, there are some questions that can be answered, and there are other questions that simply cannot. I'll take you back to the point I've made a number of times now. Judge Coates' process is not set up because we have all the answers. It is set up to get us all the answers. And from time to time, you've been on this committee a long time. I've been appearing before this committee for a long time, perhaps even longer than you've been a member of. And from time to time, you will ask questions, and despite the best endeavours of witnesses, me and others, we cannot provide you with all the answers.
Okay.
Sometimes that's because there's another process.
I've heard that you can't answer the question, Premier. I've got limited time. I'll move on. On the 24th of June, a request was sent to the Australian government for 850 ADF personnel to specifically assist with compliance and monitoring support at hotel quarantine. Within 24 hours, it was withdrawn. Why was that?
Well, there are many different requests that go to the Commonwealth. I think it's important to acknowledge that we've gone to what's called an open request model. If you don't do that, if you don't have essentially an open dialogue and an ability to add, subtract, change, modify requests, then every time you make even the most minor change, you've got to replicate all the requests. It's a ADF thing, and it's there to make sure that everyone's clear on what's needed and everyone's clear on what's coming. The open request model means that we can, without having to replicate the entire process, without a sense that, well, I'll ask for more than I need.
My time is limited. Can you get to answering the question, please?
Well, I'm explaining to you how our relationship with the ADF...
I'm asking you about a specific request for 850 ADF staff and why it was withdrawn.
That request was not made by me. That request was not made by the Crisis Council of Cabinet. The request for defence personnel, there have been many of them. They've all been met. The request you're referring to, you need to speak to the person who made that request because it was not made by anybody in a position of authority within the Victorian government.
I understand it was made by the Emergency Management Commissioner, Andrew Crisp.
And when he appears before you, you can speak to him about that.
Well, do you have still full confidence in the Commissioner?
Absolutely.
Premier, do you regret now the decision to employ private security guards in hotel quarantine?
Well, Mr. O'Brien, what I'd say to you is no one wanted a second wave of this virus, but none of us have the luxury of going back in time. None of us have the luxury of pretending that the reality we face is not the greatest challenge we've ever faced. That's what I'm focused on. There are answers that are needed, and that's why a separate process has been set up to get us those answers. And then there can be a full accounting for what happened, the deficiencies or otherwise in any of those arrangements. And we'll be able to have a much more fulsome discussion once the answers to those questions have not been provided by me essentially sitting in judgment of myself, but a separate process has got to the bottom of exactly what happened and whether that was appropriate, not appropriate, fit for purpose or otherwise. All of those questions, I don't have answers to my satisfaction and I expect to yours either. That's why we've set up a process.
Premier, does the latest genomic testing show that all the cases are linked back to hotel quarantine outbreaks?
My last briefing and my last discussion with the Chief Health Officer relates to the original batch of genomic sequencing. I do know that there have been further genomic sequencing tests done. They're done by the Doherty Institute, a division within the Doherty Institute. I would encourage you to speak to the Chief Health Officer about the latest results. I'm not briefed on those by him, but what I can say is that not as a formal briefing process, but in discussions I've had with him, his conclusion and therefore my position that at least a significant number of these cases, and therefore for the purposes of clarity, this second wave is a result of what that genomic sequencing showed us in the first instance. I've certainly had no test results brought to my attention, but again, I know it might seem...
I understand, Premier.
Mr. O'Brien, if you would like the Premier to answer your question, could you give him a moment?
The Premier's answered. I just want to get a quick one in before my time expires. Premier, are you happy as Premier for that information to be, that testing to be provided to the committee?
It's not about what I'm happy or not about. What it is, Mr. O'Brien, is I think you should direct those questions to the Chief Health Officer.
And I'm asking for your approval.
Mr. O'Brien, the member's time. Sorry, Premier, the member's time.
He's under the Public Health Act, and it's not a matter of me approving or otherwise. You should speak to him about those matters.
Thank you, Premier. The member's time has expired, and I will